Okay. Hello and welcome everybody back from the summer holidays, from some lovely beaches in Wales and walks along the Yorkshire coast and just time away with grandchildren. And so here we are back to pick up the conversation around artist networks. And I'm very, very excited, still very excited about this one. And it's been so inspiring to hear what you all had to say so far. And again, something to reflect on and think about, and again the different angles that you took, and it's just lovely. And yeah, so let's hear from anybody else who would like to go first. I know, Michelle, you were happy to have a bit more time to do your presentation. Would you be happy to?
Yeah, I can give what I've given, but it's not good like the others because I've still been trying to do this website and it takes all my energy.
Oh, we understand. But this is not school or anything, isn't it? It's a chance to kind of, for you to just talk about what you think. So it doesn't have to be in any shape or form to a standard, whatever you contribute.
Well, it's not just personal. I mean, the group I chose to look at were the Nabis. That were a group between 1888 and 1900. And I was interested in them for two reasons. One, in some ways, they went like the Pre-Raphaelites, although what they really wanted to do was completely the opposite. But both groups ended up going into the decorating arts, wallpaper, all sorts of furniture, you name it, they did it. But when they began, they were actually a group of young French artists, mostly students in the late 1880s at the Académie Julienne in Paris. And they believed a work of art was not a depiction of nature, but a synthesis of metaphors and symbols. So they admired Gauguin, Cézanne, and felt it their mission to renew art. And their name came from a Hebrew term for the prophets, and was coined by linguists who saw a parallel between their aim to revitalize art in the same way the ancient prophets had felt they needed to rejuvenate Israel. It began when one of them, a man called Paul Sensier, made a small painting of Port Avon under the guidance of Gauguin in 1888, and it was composed of assembled patches of colour. And their first modest exhibition was held at the Café des Arts and entitled the Impressionist and Synthesis Group. And their group manifesto is defined by Maurice Denis, writing as Pierre Louis, who wrote an article titled The Definition of Neo-Traditionalism. And he wrote, "Remember that a picture before becoming a battle horse, a female nude, or some sort of anecdote is essentially a flat surface covered with colours assembled in a certain order." I thought that was quite interesting because up till then, it was never thought of like that. So I can understand that, that Gauguin, the influence of Gauguin was, it would be actually feel like that. So I'm having trouble getting. Oh, there I am. So he didn't mean that form was more important than subject, but rather the profoundness of our emotions comes from the sufficiency of these lines and these colours to explain themselves. And that is different because up till then, the whole point was the actual subject matter rather than the way it was made. The two members of the group that I'm sure I certainly know well. One was Pierre Bonnard and the other one was Edouard Vuillard. And it was when they opened a studio in Paris that the other early Nabis, they went there, but there were also journalists and figures from theatre and literature who called it their temple. And it was in 1892 that they branched out into theatre, decorative arts and interior design. An important influence on the Nabis, and Bonnard in particular, were Japanese prints, which, when you think about Van Gogh, it figures that that's when they were coming in, and therefore it fed into the kind of work that they were making and the strange views that they got. So, you know, one thinks of Bonnard with his models in the bath, and not seeing people the way you did, cut off in strange ways. And they also, the symbolist movement also played a part, and so did mysticism. Materialism of the industrial world was absolutely rejected. And while they admired Baudelaire, Mallarmé, and Edgar Allan Poe, of all people, I found that quite a surprise to suddenly have Poe in the mix, they opposed naturalism as presented it by Courbet and Manet and the literature of Zola. Their objective was to break down barriers between art and decoration. And so they designed screens, murals, wallpapers, tapestries. They produced books, prints, textiles, and furniture using a variety of media. That's why I say that they reminded me of the Pre-Raphaelites, because, of course, they also went into doing much the same thing, although their philosophy was so different. The final group show, though, took place in 1900, so it didn't last very long. And the artists then went their own way, and the interest in decorative and applied art was abandoned. And then the Nabis were considered conservative. Now, in 1937, Vuillard explained why this had happened. He said, "The march of progress was so rapid, society was ready to welcome Cubism and Surrealism before we had reached what we had imagined was our goal. And we found ourselves suspended in the air. Now they're considered a transition from Impressionism and academic art to abstract art, symbolism, and other early movements of modern art." So they were quite interesting in their way, but very short-lived. But I thought that was quite interesting, where he felt they hadn't really gone as far as they wanted to go with art before they were overtaken by other modern movements. And of course, a lot of them seemed to fade away, whereas Vuillard and Bonnard went on for a long time afterwards. And you do think, when you think of people like Bonnard, that Matisse also was very influenced by them, although it's never mentioned. So I just chose them because I felt that they were a group that spanned two worlds. And that because as you came into the 20th century and all these new movements coming, and they completely sort of died away. And I suppose in some ways, perhaps they fulfilled a pivotal role, I don't know. But that's why I chose them. But obviously, even though old, I wasn't as old as them. So I'm just sort of telling you what I found out.
No, that's wonderful, honestly. And it's such a little known group, to be honest. So thank you kind of for just bringing them up and to kind of, think about them. And they are at such an interesting point in art history, isn't it? And it's interesting to kind of recognize those intersections in history. And I think sometimes they shouldn't be underestimated, isn't it? It's kind of, yeah. So thank you.
But for speaking from my own self, except for your group, the best group I was ever in was a creative writing group, and I joined this group, and it was the first year at the university in creative writing, and for some reason we all gelled. We were all pretty similar in some ways, not producing the same writing, but we were at the same point. And we all got on so well that we used to actually meet out of class once a week and eat together and then read what we'd written in between. And that was fantastic. I loved that group. But the second year, the people organising the classes put the two classes together. So instead of having a group of like 16, you were doubled, and it was hopeless. It didn't work. And also the values of the group were so far apart. And I only stayed for the second year, and then I went off, and I think the others did too. And that was a real loss, because I enjoyed the company, and we all, I suppose, we all cheered one another on in what we were writing. So that was the only other group that I've really enjoyed being in. And it's only this one that I felt a bit of the same. So thank you all very much. Big clap.
Didn't we go, David, Roger, didn't we go to see the Nabby when we tried to go once to Monet's garden?
Yeah.
And there was the Nabby exhibition, and I was overwhelmed, actually, because I hadn't seen, I mean, I've always liked Vuillard and Bonnard. But there were screens there. I remember there were screens up on the painted screens. Who knows whether that influenced me making a screen? But I do remember it being, I think you're right. It was kind of pivotal, but nobody noticed because there were two such big things happening either side.
Absolutely.
That I think, and I think really they were, very influential in an odd sort of way. I love Bonnard. He painted his wife in the bath, didn't he?
That's right. And again, from that really odd angle.
Yeah,
one wonders if, like your beloved husband, he was actually on a step ladder.
Oh, right. When I was a mermaid in the bath.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, I have a history of people in the bath. I had a boyfriend before Roger who I body painted completely. We've recently made contact. Well, I didn't. Roger made contact with him, and Roger saw some of his work, and it was strangely. Didn't you say, Roger? It was strangely like the stuff I used to do when I used to do body painting, and what are all those things, meridian lines that are supposed to be on your body, and that they use for it's influenced by Japanese and that kind of thing. Interesting. I think I'll take another look at them. Good idea.
Vuillard is, I was really happy that you focused on them, Michelle. Vuillard's my, if I had any artist that I just loved because of their visual work, it would be Vuillard. I love his work. And I was interested, but I didn't quite catch the link with pre-Raphaelites. But
it's only me, because
no, but I think I agree, because if I think about a Vuillard painting, it's so saturated with patches of detail and then another patch of detail, and then I think about pre-Raphaelites, that's also got that saturation of.
Well, for me, the pre-Raphaelites were the only group that I knew, or that I know of really in this country, that also got caught into the applied arts and making screens and making furniture, you see. That's why, because they both started from two very, very different points. I mean, the pre-Raphaelites wanted everything to go back to Raphael, and that way of painting every detail done, which is quite opposite to the Nabis. But the fact that they both then went into applied art and wallpaper and, all these things, that's to me where they came together.
I suppose what I'm saying is you saying that sparked a connection for me. I know one's realistic and one's more abstract, but in both works, the canvas is saturated with stuff, and
if you look at pre-Raphaelites in a certain way, there is a strange abstraction to it, because I paint narratives and I paint what apparently is realistic, but then it isn't. And I've had somebody say to me, actually your work is strangely abstract, and I used to feel that about pre-Raphaelites, and I still wish I'd written my dissertation on the pre-Raphaelites, but it was so naff to do anything to do with the pre-Raphaelites when I was at it was considered, and I now think I'd have got a lot more out of it actually than trying to do futurism, which I made a bodge of.
I can't see you and futurism matching. So I fully understand.
Weirdly, the boyfriend I just mentioned in the bath, he was a bit of a Svengali, which is why I'm quite annoyed Roger's got in touch with him. Because I think he fancies himself as Joseph Boys. I shouldn't be saying all this, but anyway, he was very, oh, you don't want to do those silly, you know, whatever. And of course, being 18 or something, 19, before I was with Roger, I kind of went, oh, all right then. And I ended up, you know, doing something that was really all mixed up with fascism. And the only thing I really enjoyed was Par Ubu and the Alfred Jarry plays and all that stuff.
Which are actually very surreal, you know, they're very surreal, those plays, I think.
Yeah.
Very weird. But it just, you know, I like you, it was Bernard and VR. I don't really know the others, but it was interesting because, of course, they both went on to have big careers in their own right, whereas most of the others, they've sunk out of trace.
I was just going to say that, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, we went to did you go to the RA one, this one here, Felix Vallotton?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, well, yes, I've got that book. We went, didn't you go with us?
I think we
yeah, I've got the book. I've been looking at it.
He's one of these unknowns that you were talking about. And the exhibition was quite a revelation. I thought it was some of the work was quite superb. And yet he's completely forgotten.
Well, I think it was true what they said, that, you know, before they'd really come into their own, they were overtaken by those other bigger movements.
Yeah, quite.
Yeah, and I mean, they're still not really well known. I mean, they were only going 12 years, so it's not a very long time.
Yeah.
But the painting was quite beautiful.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful. And maybe that was, you know.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see that, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the.
Yes, I remember now. Yeah.
Yeah, it suddenly brought it all back to me because I remember the word Nabis. I thought, I've never heard that before. And then apparently he was one of the bunch. And there's a nice picture, if I remember the exhibition, of the whole group of them. Done in a kind of realistic style, but they're all there, the group together, which would be.
It's very easy in the art world to get dismissed, isn't it? If you're not on point, you know.
Yes, right. Nice that they can rediscover them, and we can all you know, really enjoy their, you know, their painting again, the second time round.
I think for us it was conceptual art in the era that came from us. It was dominated, our course in Hull, by conceptual art, some of which was interesting, but it put people who were painters or came intending to be painters like me out on a limb, you know. It was.
And you were too young. I mean,
you couldn't challenge things really.
I was the same when I first went to Corsham. I mean, you're straight from school. You don't have a lot there. But when you can go back later, then you've got your own experience and you can start making your own decisions and where you're going. So I'm not surprised.
It's been a long wait there.
All the better. Think about wine. And on that note, everybody goes silent.
Michelle, I'm going to come across as really stupid now. How do you actually spell the name of the group that you were talking about?
N-A-B-I-S.
N-M-A-B.
No, N for noodle.
Yeah.
A-B-I-S. And as I say, it was a very small amount of time. They had several exhibitions, including one at a gallery that made, oh dear, I've forgotten the name of it. It was a gallery that made another movement famous. It's gone. Sorry, it's gone out of my head.
No, that's really good. I've been searching for it the whole time you've been talking, so I can look at the pictures. So I found it now. Thank you.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much, Michelle. That was really, really good. Great.
I don't mind going next because actually I'd done pre-Raphaelite. Oh dear, oh dear.
Perfect.
So,
Perfect.
you know,
Let me
okay,
spotlight you, David.
going back. Okay, going back.
That's interesting.
Very good. Oh, wait a minute. Shit.
Oh, the paintings are lovely, Michelle.
They're beautiful, aren't they?
The men always put me to shame because they always have these beautiful presentations all written down.
No, I haven't got one.
Can you see that then?
Yeah, that's up.
Yes, thank you.
I mean, I was scratching around for something like to do, and the thing was, I went to. I usually go to the Ashmolean, and it turns out they have one room devoted entirely to their pre-Raphaelites. So I thought,
Yes.
it's a good excuse to
Light bulb moment.
take some photographs and look at the pictures for a change, because it's the kind of room that you might pass through, if you see what I mean, because you're going somewhere else to see something else, and you might clock a few of the pictures, but you won't actually start looking at them. So this was a good chance to look at them and find out something about the pre-Raphaelites. It's in fact room 66. So I'm taking you through room 66 at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. So in case you've never been there, this is an experience of a lifetime. Here it is. This is room 66. You're entering it here. This guy, this bust here, is the guy that collected all the pieces together. I don't know who he is. I don't know anything about him, but apparently he was a collector and he liked the pre-Raphaelites. So this was his little donation to the museum. Right. I know there's been lots of groups before the PRB. I'll call them the PRB, so I don't have to keep repeating pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, etc. The PRB, like artist studios, schools of painting, and there's been many more since. Even so, in a way, I tend to think of the PRB as being the original kind of movement in the modern sense. A group of like-minded artists getting together and deciding to paint in their own peculiar way. The works in room 66 may or may not be familiar to you. I would say that as a collection, it's fairly typical, although by no means inclusive. I think, if I remember, Birmingham City Art Gallery has a much, much more extensive group of pre-Raphaelites, which I think is probably the best in the country. But anyway, this is not too bad. Okay, so I didn't want to make this too much of a dry history lesson, although when I come to read this again, it does sound a bit like that. But I've got to give you a little bit of an explanation, I suppose. Here we are. The group was formed in 1848. The original 7 members were William Holman Hunt, John Everett Millais, Dan T. Gabriel Rossetti, William Michael Rossetti, James Collinson, Frederick George Stevens, and Thomas Woolner. I'm fairly familiar with most of them, but not all of them. But some people may know more about it than I do. Here we are. Only ever a loose association. The group's principle was shared by other artists at the time, including Ford Madox Brown, whom I particularly like, Arthur Hughes, Mary Spatali Stillman, Charles Alston Collins, and then later on by Edward Burne-Jones, of course, William Morris, and James Waterhouse. The Brotherhood's early ideas, and I've got Wikipedia to thank for all this, by the way.
So do I.
There you go. The Brotherhood's early ideas, as defined by William Michael Rossetti, I think that was a poet, I think, were expressed in 4 declarations: to have genuine ideas to express, to study nature attentively, so as to know how to express them, to sympathise with what is direct and serious and heartfelt in previous art, to the exclusion of what is conventional, self-parodying and learnt by rote. Most indispensable of all, produce thoroughly good pictures and statues. These are fairly simple and straightforward set of ideas, broad enough to attract a diverse group of artists. Naturally, all of it is figurative, but nevertheless, there's plenty of contrasts in style and content, as we shall see later on. Some of these works were controversial at the time, and many of these artists were conscious of being different in the sense of going against the grain and rejecting formal ways of painting. Here's, as you go into room 66, this portrait kind of jumps out you straight away because it's there at the entrance. And it's a full-length portrait of John Ruskin, painted by Millais. Ruskin wrote a series of books entitled Modern Painters between 1843 and 1860, drawing attention to Turner's work in the earliest book, and then championing the PRB in a later volume. It seems sort of a paradox, really, that a group of contemporary artists deliberately drew their inspiration for the past, these are the RBH, retrospective in a sense. The thing is, we generally expect to follow the progress of art in terms of modernism, from pre-impressionism to post-impressionism onwards, as Jill was explaining, I think, when she did her piece last time. Whereas this lot looked backwards. It seemed like almost, in a sense, pre-modern, in a sense, if you could call it that, rather than postmodern. The thing is that you can tend to think of the PRB as somewhat regressive, certainly out of step with the drama of modern art as it's beginning to unfold in France. So what to make of them now? It's a pity my favourite artist, Paul Alex Brown, is conspicuously absent from room 66, as is Dante Gabriel Rossetti, although oddly they have two of his chairs there. I don't know quite why. They're on display. I guess the things I like and dislike about the paintings can perhaps be summed up under a number of different headings. And here's where we get to the pictures. Here we go. First of all, Victorian. This is the historical context in what I associate with that era. Things like the Industrial Revolution, British Empire, Gladstone and Disraeli, all from our history lessons at school. Also the poetry of William Wordsworth, novels of Charles Dickens and Thomas Hardy, all of which I toiled over in English literature, and which I came to loathe, actually, because I just didn't like doing it at school, which is a pity. Probably I missed out on a lot of great literature. But on the positive side, there's also William Morris, Charles Darwin, and of course, Karl Marx, whom of course I do admire. There's more Victorianism. Then, of course, there's a religion. This is an aspect of the work I find difficult to appreciate, since I'm not religious myself. I see some paintings as quite reactionary. Again, in the historical context comes to mind. The Oxford movement, Anglo-Catholicism, Anglicanism influenced some of these painters a great deal. It was a kind of reappraisal of belief in an age when dissenting and non-conformist churches seriously challenged the established order. Indeed, when Christian faith itself was clearly under serious attack by skeptics. There's another one, example. Representation. I was going to say that more to the point is the attempt at lifelike depiction of the world, people and places. It's so skillful in a way. I really admire it. I have to say I quite find it astonishing. I suppose you could characterize it as a type of realism or attempt at realism, albeit a realism which sees the world with an odd mixture of romanticism and idealism. What some people sometimes refer to as PRB weirdness or fantasy, which is a strange contradiction when you think about it. And of course, there's sentimentality, of course, which again is another Victorian attribute. It comes to mind as an overtly romanticized view of women and children, for instance, and idealized beauty, especially female beauty, and innocence, children, of course, all hand in hand with a Victorian sense of moral virtue and piety. And of course, there's narrative. These are pictures that tell a story, by which I mean the picture of history as a subject for painting, including with the PRB, a dose of myth and legend, particularly medieval and the biblical kind. Some of it quite risible, I think. Although in fairness to the painter like Ormond Hunt, an admirable attempt to breathe life into biblical history. I often associate the PRB with the Gothic revival, again another Victorianism, which I happen to have mixed feelings about myself. The removal or the renewal of interest in ancient cathedrals and Gothic architecture, stemming in part from the enthusiasm for medievalism. But of course that benefited in some ways because the cathedrals were rediscovered by them. Even so, there are many Victorian buildings in the Gothic style which I just cannot abide for their ugliness. And then finally, there's more narrative, and then there's colour. Along with the figurative aspect, one of the things I do find appealing about RBH is their deliberate lack of inhibitions with regard to colour, which gives the painting so much vitality. None of the chiaroscuro and tenebra style of the old masters, which, to their credit, the PRB artists were determined to banish from painting. Yeah.
I'll find something.
Well, get your kicks in room 66.
Yes.
Oh, God.
I'm surprised when you're going through all those different categories, David. I'm surprised you didn't mention symbolism. Because I mean, lots of those paintings are absolutely packed with symbolism.
I'm trying to find one.
Thinking particularly of The Awakening Conscience by William Holden.
Yeah,
Yes.
William Holden. That's the one I'm looking for,
It's
Roger.
absolutely riddled with
That's it.
symbols.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yes,
Yes.
of course. Yeah. Oh well. See, I'm not.
And it's all about the mistress.
I couldn't.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I couldn't cover all the ground. I'm afraid. I'm sorry about that. I did want to mention.
I'm not criticising.
No, neither am I.
I was going to mention though that they are very popular paintings, aren't they? When you think about it, everybody's got a favourite. I think of the pre-Raphaelites. You know, whether in my case it's Work by Claude Maddox Brown, but I mean
they're so riddled with.
But there's Christ, the light of the world, which I know some religious people really go for, and of course there's that picture of Ophelia.
That's right. Where the model nearly died.
But
they have a bad reputation with women, really, because
I can well
of Elizabeth Siddal, you know, dying in the bar, you know, catching pneumonia, and then Millay, you mentioned.
Oh yes, I mean there's
he married, and they're always making these absolutely terrible television series about them with people like Aidan playing Rossetti or something, and they're always sort of ramped up with sexual
innuendos.
yeah, instead of actually about the painting and stuff, because I think, you know, it makes them seem very trite when they put all these series on that are all about their romantic, when they were quite intense, quite intense people, really.
Well, in some ways, they were very typical of that age. You know, what David mentioned about the religion thing and Darwin and all the doubts, and then Dickens. You know, they really did. They were indicative of all those things. They stood for it. It's amazing, but I think that they've never been fully valued as painters.
Well, the Ford Madox Brown one that I think of most is the one of the immigrants.
That's right, yeah.
And really, there was a lot of storytelling that was about quite serious. Well, one of your favourites, isn't it? That Ford Madox Brown, one of the immigrants. You know, in the coat.
The last of England.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I think there was a lot of stuff going on in those narratives that was just to say, you know, they were sentimental narratives. I think there was a bit more to it than that going on there. But then they were all very individual.
But I think the sentimentality also comes from the fact that the Victorians themselves were very sentimental.
Mm.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
That's what I meant about when you look at them, they stand for a lot that was going on at that time. It's, you know, one forgets.
Mm.
I
mean, I'm glad you've brought them up, and I think it's really because they're one of my favorites. They always have been, and it's funny that what Julia said as well, because people always kind of slightly laugh at you when you kind of say the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, and they don't take you fully serious if you actually mention that they're one of your favorites, like you actually really know about art. Although I think I've been to a few exhibitions of them, and I'm always quite blown away by the, you know, by the strength of their image and the power of their stories and the talent. And I think actually, David, you mentioned something really interesting, and I'm not entirely sure, but it could be right, isn't it? That they are one of the first of those kind of movements and networks that have come together behind a principle, I guess. Maybe is that, I'm probably completely wrong. I haven't looked much further. For me, that's when I get interested in art, is actually the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood onwards. So I find it a really, really interesting period. But I do wonder why it actually is that they're just not.
I think they were even ridiculed a little bit in their own time for being, you know, it's like, you know, the paintings were pretty and they were hugely detailed, and I think there was a lot of disillusion with what had gone before. And so they were trying to put new life into those stories. Like you said about the biblical stories, they were looking at things from different angles. And I think they are very under, and I think, I can't remember, I've been to a huge exhibition of it. I can't remember whether it was in the National Gallery or Tate Britain.
There was one in Manchester, you know, around in the 90s, there was quite a big exhibition of their work there. But I think when you look at those and you look at the Nabis and what the Nabis were trying to do, they fit in with the modern type of push forward away from narrative. But the Pre-Raphaelites, of course, when you think that in the academies, that the actual storytelling, the things behind the Bible or the Greek or Roman myths were very high. I mean, they were high status. So to that degree, they were following on from that. But as you said, they started using colour in a completely different way. You know, it wasn't brown varnish.
I always think of the Pre-Raphaelites and Art Nouveau being the same thing. So are they totally?
Because I think William Morris and the arts and crafts movement and all that.
That went into that. Yes.
It's all, if you unravel it, you know, they're all very individual.
And it was Art Nouveau, that academy where the Nabis showed. It was the Museum of I've forgotten the name again. I'm having a bad day today. But the Sarah's just said that actually made that other movement famous. You know
what, Art Nouveau?
I mean,
yes, Art Nouveau. It was called the Museum Art Nouveau, and that was before Art Nouveau had an exhibition there, and it took its name from that museum that first showed the work.
I think it's inevitable that I would like the mythological stuff they did, which was masses and masses, and I've just found that one, and it couldn't get much more surrealistic than this was. What's his name? Burne-Jones. And
Burne-Jones, I think, became one of the most
the heads in the sort of, I mean, it's very surrealist, really, in its kind of content of what, and they are very much like fairy tales, but I think that's what gave it a bad reputation eventually, because it was considered, you know, standard run-of-the-mill illustration, you know, and I get quite defensive about illustration. I
was just going to say that the about Room 66 is that there is such a diverse, different group of artists there. You know, they're all individual, and they have their own style almost, and you think, how do they relate to each other? And I think it's just kind of this loose association that they talk about that brought them together. People who did like landscapes of Wales, and then others who did medieval sort of like manuscript painting, if you know what I mean. Quite different styles brought together under one roof.
Some of the woodcuts I really like, and I'm not sure if I'm getting it slightly wrong, but some of the Art Nouveau woodcuts, that kind of, they must overlap into that. They do.
Yes, they do. They were indirect line from all of that, and it was looking back because of that theory of, well, as David said, looking back to the medieval time, when artists like that believed that was the last time that an artist and craftsman were the same thing. Which is why I found the Nabis and them interesting, because they went into the applied arts, whereas of course the other thinking was painting was a higher art than any crafts. So it's just I suppose, I mean, it's a very interesting time when you look at Victorian times and then into the 20th century, the development of thinking and ideas. You know, it really is interesting.
Well, there's a tremendous amount of, in their painting, illustration of glorious pieces of cloth and the costume, and it's very melodramatic, because that is one of my favourites.
Oh yes, yes.
Chesterton, and I can't not like it. I'm sorry. I know there's a certain, and I was told continuously when I was a student that it was very naff of me to like the pre-Raphaelites, because, you know...
they have no right to say that, though, Julia. We make our own minds up.
What would they know? They were the same age as me. But the tutors, I think a lot of the tutors made you feel it wasn't the most interesting. Oh, gosh, it's a girl again. She wants to do the pre-Raphaelites. Blah, blah, blah. And as soon as somebody tells me I can't do something, usually I do it now. I do it, but I didn't then. I used to listen to them then.
I think it went against the grain almost, because it wasn't in the modernist tradition that Jill was explained to about the last time. It just didn't fit in there, and therefore it was kind of dismissed as being, well, you know, something else or something in the past. Whereas we were following the trajectory that leads us to modern art as it was being practiced when we were at college, I suppose.
I'm not so surprised that there was such diversity amongst the pre-Raphaelites, because when I think about it, if I think about our group, for instance, we all work very differently, we have very different, but it doesn't mean we haven't got common idea of talking about art and about, you know, examining art and examining storytelling. All these things are, you know, things that I think bring any group together, and somehow you kind of bend it. That's the influence of other artists on you. So I'm sure within the Pre-Raphaelites, they were all influencing one another, and sometimes to the effect of, no, I'm not doing it that way, I'm doing it my way. You know.
And also, it's very connected with literature. You know, you think of Rossetti and it was very much tied with literature. And in a sense, they were also thinking like the Nabis in that they wanted art and craft to come back together again. They didn't want that, but of course it carried on fracturing until nowadays. Well, I don't know, when you first went, and I certainly first went, that although craft in the sense of ceramics could be high because of the Japanese influence, ones like weaving, you think about the Bauhaus, where a lot of the wives were only allowed to do things like tapestry because that was women's work. Yeah. So it's carried on fracturing. It's less now, I think, because art has become very strange. You know, when you look at what's being done now, I find some of it extraordinarily strange. It doesn't fit in with any of my ideas at all. And I suppose that's to do with the internet, because we're seeing more.
Oh. Yeah.
David, what's the like, well, not thinking how to say it, like the connection between Pre-Raphaelites and like nature and the environment, because it feels that that's a strong aspect of them.
Oh yeah, well, they painted on plein air, all those Millet.
And they wanted to try to put plants in their paintings the way plants had been put in tapestries during the Middle Ages, which is why everything is so absolutely detailed.
Ordered.
You know,
is it a reaction to industrialization as well? Is there a reaction there to
well, definitely in the Pre-Raphaelites there was. They hated it. You know, they didn't like anything that was happening with industrialization.
I think they thought it was ugly, didn't they? They thought it was brutalist and ugly. I mean, brutalism obviously came. They thought it was ugly. And,
especially Ruskin.
Huh?
Especially
Ruskin, yeah.
Yeah, it would be a threat to the arts.
They always portray Ruskin as terribly effeminate because of the whole business of Agnes,
his wife, and not realising
not being able to consummate, not being able to cope with the fact that women didn't look like they did in paintings when you took the clothes off. It was a bit of a strange one, Ruskin.
Well, just to say that Holman Hunt took it to a great extreme, didn't he? He went and painted the scapegoat. Biblical glory in the actual location, in the Red Sea at the actual time of day. So he was trying to be faithful to nature in a very naturalistic sense of realism.
And there's the Last of England. I've just found it, which very much is haunting at the moment when we know what's going on. It sort of seems, you know, last days of Afghanistan. But I was trying
again,
to
Julia, can you hold it up again?
Oh, wait a minute. There we go. Sorry, I was still looking for the one where he went up to the Red Sea and painted. Yeah.
As a scapegoat.
Well, Roger did, in a true way, Photoshop this once, Roger, didn't you? And you put, I can't remember whose face, did you put Chloe and Lee's?
Chloe was last of London when they moved.
When she moved back to Hull. But she went back to London again.
It wasn't the last of London.
Yeah, that it wasn't the last of London by any means. Yeah, it was her and Lee, wasn't it, you did it for?
What dates were the Folie Bergère posters? Were they the right? That's the right time as well, isn't it? Because they're really graphic. And
a tiny bit earlier. But yes, I mean, again, they were doing things like posters, but I think a lot of that was a Japanese influence as well, which, I mean, that came.
And you saying about the literary content, I mean,
Yeah.
the Ophelia one, they're all, you know, Shakespearean, you know, and
But you see, they were
the amount of detail done into, and I love.
Oh yes, the Robin there. I don't know if you've ever seen, gone into the actual gallery and looked at it, but there's a little.
There's Robin. A Robin, yeah.
Yeah, which you never know it's on a reproduction, but when you see it in the gallery, is it
just about.
There is little Robin singing in the every perfect detail.
I couldn't believe it when I saw it in real life in a gallery. Oh. I really didn't expect it to be there for some reason. I didn't expect to actually be stood in front of a genuine painting. It really, I stood and looked at it for about an hour, just probably a bit gobsmacked.
That's another Millet one with his legs stretched out. I absolutely love. Honestly, I know I love figurative stuff, but there's all sorts going on under that table and.
I love the dresses.
Playing footsie and.
There's a dress that they wear in the Waterhouse pictures. The lady wears the same dress on the Ophelia picture, and there's another two, isn't there, that she's wearing it on? And it's just
modelled.
A gorgeous dress.
Yeah. Well, they did use loads of props and stuff. I think I love that as well. That, you know, there was this drawing from life and on plein air, and I love. Who's the one in Belgium, Roger? Who has that way of? Oh, Struth. You know, what's his name? I've forgotten.
Frank Brangwyn.
Huh?
Frank Brangwyn.
Yeah, Frank Brangwyn has that same way of drawing the figures, like, you know, these hugely detailed. And when I look at Stanley Spencer, and he puts his things, you know, there's something. I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit into my own little world here. But the Stanley Spencer thing where he drew everything out and then painted small areas at a time. And the last painting he didn't finish of the regatta, and it had that same quality of detailed nature, and you know, and he didn't finish it because he dropped dead.
You know, did you actually know that Derek Jarman did a film called The Last of England?
Yeah.
Did you? Yeah. And it took its name from Ford Madox Brown's painting and the themes of escape and the changing of place. I haven't seen it. Has any of you seen it?
No.
It's nice how these things get picked up.
No, but we're planning to go to Derek Jarman's garden, aren't we, when we go to...
Oh, I'm jealous.
Are you? I know, I am.
Oh, gosh.
We're going to do lots of gardens. Might even manage to get Chloe there because she's there for the weekend.
No. Did you read the book? It's amazing. I love his book. It's called Modern Garden, isn't it? His diary, like where he writes in every day about his garden.
And there's lots of poems as well that he wrote to do with that garden, that last garden he made.
Making a garden in such quite bleak place is quite fascinating.
But finding all the flowering plants that actually love those conditions. Look,
all this talk has come out of David doing the pre-Raphaelites because they were passionate. They may have not always been right about a lot of things, but they were passionate. And if there's anything I love in art, it's a bit of passion.
Absolutely. And I think kind of, taking that as a kind of starting point to move on to another presentation, because I think, it's nice to dig deep into what we all think about artist networks and how we present them, but as well what kind of the conversation that kind of is stimulated by the different network thoughts. So that was really nice. So yes, I think Sarah, you're still kind of outstanding, and Glynis as well. So whoever wants to go next.
Nice one, Glynis, because I can just talk on a theme, but it's not. I haven't planned a presentation. It was just a discussion. Yeah,
I mean, I definitely want to say something as well, because it's it's just one of my favorite topics. But I realize I'm taking a slightly different angle from all of you, but it kind of is, yeah.
Oh, that sounds intriguing. Why don't you do yours, Mary?
But it's very, very, it's not finished, and I'd like to do it really properly and nicely. So I'm
Oh, well,
pushing that.
then we'll hear one of the others, and then when you've finished it, we'll look forward.
That's it, you know, I'm gonna do a proper nice presentation like the boys do.
I know. If I could get my illustrations up connected, I would do it too. But I know now that they never show, so I don't even
If you're going
try.
to do it next week, you can do it.
And
for
the
my
thing is, in a
birthday.
way, I kind of enjoy almost, pulling all the information together, isn't it? But I feel like, I need to give myself a bit more time. So, yeah.
Okay.
So maybe, did you say, Glynis, would you be happy to go next?
I haven't really, well, I haven't done a presentation really, but I was, well, while we were talking, so I haven't got anything prepared really at all, because I've had a cough as well, so speaking might bring on a cough.
Dave's pointing at me saying I should go, but I haven't actually planned anything. But
No,
he's
well, I haven't
pointing at me
either.
saying you should go, but I don't really, but
No, but if you, do yours, Sarah, because I think you've probably got, you've got something, because I haven't.
And you've only got a cough.
Got a cough, so I'll probably start coughing.
Are you feeling a bit better, Glynis?
Yeah.
It's carrying on though, isn't it? You're finding it hard to completely lose it.
Yeah, I know, and I seem to have lost a lot of strength. Sort of doing things is a lot of effort.
Have you done a lateral flow test?
Yeah, I've done them, and I did a PCR one. I haven't done one recently, actually, so I should do another one. But if you get any sort of cold at the moment, it seems that it does linger on a bit. But I mean, I'm also supposed to be trying to give up smoking as well, so that's I think that's what makes it worse, actually. So I really need to look at that. But I think, I'd just like to say that, nice to see you back. Are you back, Marianne, or are you still away?
I'm back home. Yes.
Yeah, just wanted to say,
from Wales.
I liked your posts you had on the, and it looked like you had a great time, and I'm sure you connected with a lot of networks in Germany as well, so it'd be good to hear your presentation at some point as well.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't, but in the long run I would like to, actually, definitely. I didn't get a chance this time.
Well, it was all work, wasn't it, for you?
Yes.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed I enjoyed being physical, and actually just being physical, not sitting behind a computer and a screen and just moving. And I really enjoyed that. It's weird, isn't it? I almost had a bit of a phobia coming back and sitting behind a screen for a whole day. Not like this is different, isn't it? But if your work consists of sitting on a chair, it's really odd. I think it's so unnatural. But anyway, so give me mountains and physical work anytime, actually. For a bit. So I'm really, I think everybody should feel easy about, it's not about doing a fancy presentation. If,
Sarah,
if you're not up for it this time, then, just go with the flow. Happy for you to kind of speak or not speak. Sarah as well, again, and I shouldn't have kind of said what I actually said about what I'm planning. It's kind of for me. It's not actually for you. It's just.
Oh no, it's nice. It's anticipation, Marianne. It's anticipation for us.
No, it's not. It's not going to be anything special. It's more.
Well, mine wasn't special.
Time with it.
But you just throw something in front of everybody, and then all kinds of things start coming out.
That's it. I think from this one, these sort of thoughts that I've had, I think that I said discussion point, because I think I've come up with some ideas. I haven't put any pictures to it, unfortunately, but I think it'll create some form of conversation. Shall I do mine, Marianne?
Yeah, no, go. I'm looking to spotlight you. Yeah.
Just a bit. Oh, actually, I've just realised in the background I've got a picture. I'm going to show you this picture on the wall. Have you seen? It's the statues. It's Wilberforce and Can you see it?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
It's like gay abandon.
Does anyone recognise it? I
Hmm.
bought it in Hull. It's Wilberforce. It's the two statues in Hull are stopping to have a chat. But anyway, it's just a screen print. I don't know who did it. So yeah, my talk was just about collectives really, and the word collective, because having set something up that was called What is Collective, it threw me into a place of kind of having to overanalyze the term collective, and it in some ways it held me back. So from what was this beautiful word which I just loved and fell in love with, and the idea of what a collective was, I fell in love with what I thought it was. It actually kind of became slightly hindering because I wanted to honour it, and quite hard to honour the word collective when you have quite a clear idea of where it's going. Almost you kind of have to have no idea of where it's going and be completely happy to relinquish it at any moment to others. So it's like I suppose in a way it was to discuss the idea of collectives, creativity and ownership, maybe, kind of thinking about whether a collective is always the right name for something that has a collective spirit. The definition of collectives in different places varies greatly. So the idea of collectives in one place here says shared ideologies, common goals, aesthetic and political views, and tightly knit groups of artists. But then that kind of makes me think of cliques, which is totally against collective sort of ethos, really. We looked briefly at a few different collectives that exist as in a definition of top 10 collectives, and what came up, everything was just so broad, and even coming down to some of the collectives are just 2 people or 3 main members, you know, just people that exhibit together, or it's all very broad, and it's all just what people make it. It isn't really any of them consistent to any yeah, it isn't, because it isn't just a group, it's a lot more than that. So there was a list of ways that Guerrilla Girls came up with, a list of ways to resolve problems within a collective. One of the things was losing, you have to learn to lose control, which is interesting. So some of the definitions were a group of artists working together to achieve common objectives, artists, curators and supporters who want to work together to support every member of the collective, which is quite hard to do. And I think in a way, looking at some of the work that we've just been looking at, the quality of the work is so good that having a collective, like say you do an exhibition and everybody has like a collective kind of input into the work, and the ownership is collective, would that hold you back from doing something that was really, really personal? So I've got lots of thoughts down here. There's a few more thoughts, a few more definitions of collectives. One says a result of artists working together, usually under their own management, shared ideologies, working and living together, shared ownership, risk and benefits. So risk is another thing. But actually I think maybe collectives can be held back because of also like having to get everybody's veto before you can move forward on anything. As opposed to normal business structures with hierarchy, i.e. no one in charge. So some of the collectives that are listed under the top 10 collectives, I think are probably just collaborative. I don't know. I think it maybe depends on your definition. And also another thing was ownership. One of the things that one of the collective members said was that it needs to feel like shared ownership to feel comfortable, which was quite interesting. Yeah, so new members bringing fresh ideas that are always important. And one of the things that I liked about collectives when I first kind of first time I saw it was on a flyer on Brick Lane, and first time I saw it and kind of thought, oh, I really like that idea. It was just a grey flyer, it had a gold circle on it, so quite expensive to produce, this flyer, so it wasn't like DIY basic, it was using an embossed circle which looked a bit like a compass. It kind of looked a bit spiritual or something, but it wasn't. It was just a design someone had done that was a circle with lots of lines around it, compass-like. Possibly a little bit, I don't know, and I just like, it said collective underneath, and when I saw that it was jewellery, remember being disappointed because I wanted it to be painting, and I wanted it to take me to a little gallery that was in a falling down building where they'd whitewashed the walls, and there was artwork there that maybe looked like somebody had put it there and didn't really it didn't maybe have a value, it just had like an intention. And I feel like collectives are born of disruption, so they come out of something, where an energy has pulled people together. And one experience I had personally where I found this kind of energy was when I was in Berlin with Pennington, who just tuned in, so very timely. And she went around picking up bits of building ruins, and we kind of got involved in like what was kind of not long after the Berlin Wall came down, really. It wasn't that long, and there was still no man's land was still there. There was lots of cranes that looked like they were dancing, and there were loads of little bars with like these falling down buildings, whitewashed walls, people creating work probably somewhere up at the top of the building. They looked like they'd just put it on the wall and left it there, but it wasn't like they were bothered about people running off with it. There wasn't a value like an art gallery value. It just had a collective spirit, a feeling that people were optimistic and working together and creating something out of disruption, with an optimism attached to it. So the pressure wasn't there for them to be the big I am. They just had to share that play, I suppose. The word play is definitely a thing that so art was used to support them through a process, through something. So Dave's just prompting me. I was ready to finish then, but he said I should share my bad experiences of collectives. I don't have any bad experiences of collectives. The only thing about what he's talking about is the fact that when I did a thing that was a collective, everybody in the collective wanted to create artwork, which is amazing because they were all absolutely brilliant artists in lots of different disciplines, not just painters but writers and all kinds of things, photographers. And when I tried to delegate work to try and get this kind of collective thing going, where it was like maybe you might want to do some PR, or you might want to do that, just to try and encourage it, people just wanted to create the artwork, which was absolutely fine. But then I'd put myself in a position of calling it a collective, so I'd kind of confused myself and befuddled myself because everybody was totally happy and I was happy to do it as it was, but because it was a collective, it didn't feel like it actually was, and it confused me. Just confused me. So that's, I suppose, what he means. It wasn't negative there, because everybody was fab and we all loved working together. There we go.
Excellent. That's great. And I think, because he said as a starting point for a discussion, and I love the way you actually took the word and kind of really went deep into what it means. And I know we've had this discussion before, and I think it is such a fascinating topic, isn't it? What is a collective? What does it mean? You know, what do people talk about, and what are the pitfalls? And I think it just speaks so much to you as a person and an artist, that you took that really serious. You know, you took the responsibility on to kind of be true to the word collective in a way. And it's nice, because I'm sure, and I'm probably going to come at it from the exact opposite end. You know, it's kind of really interesting. They might sum up that, you know, kind of, the two scales, isn't it? So, thank you. I think it's a beautiful idea, a collective, isn't it? And kind of try and pin it down into words and define it. Sometimes kind of, you can lose something almost, isn't it? Because you almost think you haven't got what it says on the tin, although you have exactly got what you need. Like, I mean, all the exhibitions you've done with What Is Collective were amazing. They might not have been what's written on the tin of a collective, but in a way it was an amazing collective. So, yeah.
Everyone's still on board. It's just it's just me struggling with the idea of the word collective, and I bought the URL and everything's hosted on it. So in a way, it would have been better to have been called collaborators, or
I am in awe of you, Sarah, because having done the female gaze with my daughter and tried to bring all these women together from CAG, it wasn't easy. And this week I had something which struck me as very, yesterday, very pertinent, because apparently Mick Jagger had described Charlie Watts as his drummer.
Oh, I heard that.
And Charlie Watts had said, "No, you're my singer."
Yeah, good call.
And I felt it had something of what you were saying there. It's trying to be, showing eventually I brought in through Chloe a curator who individually went round to all the artists and talked to them, and nobody had, then it was balanced. Because I think it is quite difficult for somebody not to stand out. It's like in this group, some of us talk too much and some of us don't talk as much. Does that matter? Not if it kind of gels and it works, but it's quite a hard thing to achieve. So I'm in awe of you, Sarah.
Maybe for me it shows as well, like our group and frankly what Marianne's done, because like you, Julia, I've done projects which are my passion. You bring people together, and then it's really difficult, because how do you ask people to do things? It's just really awkward. And what's amazing about Lockdown Still Lives is that people do things, and it isn't awkward. I haven't explained that very well, but that's been my experience in the past with projects. Like, they're voluntary, people aren't being paid. I'm scared to ask people to do things, and they probably would be very willing to do them. But this group just seems, I marvel at it, really. I do marvel at it, having done things and, to a certain success, but also the difficulty of it. But this seems to just happen really well. So I don't know, I've thought that all the time. There must be a magic ingredient that gets people equally on board and accepting. And didn't explain that very well, but I saw some nodding heads, so I know people know what I mean.
Yeah.
Well, feeling it's very valuable to me is because it because it has worked, and I don't know why. I mean, it was not a great thing, mother and daughter working together. And at some point I decided in the meetings, Chloe could run them and I could do the notes because I lost. I just would go off at so many tangents. But the nice thing about this group is you can go off at tangents all over the place. We all do, I think, a bit. Well, I do anyway. And we're tolerated quite nicely. Whereas I could feel myself going back into my shell when I was trying to do the female gaze. Chloe, what do I do now? But, you know, a lot of younger people seem to have more experience with organising stuff and being, you know, and I found it very, very hard, I have to be honest. So like I say, I'm in awe of you, Sarah. I think you do a marvellous job. But I'm in awe of Marion as well. And I know exactly what she means about not wanting to come back and sit. This is the only bit of sitting in front of a computer I enjoy. The rest of it is like, you know, if I had to do what my children are doing, where they're spending teaching online, working online, everything online, I mean, you know, well, it's all a bit too scary, isn't it? Because, you know, we can say what we like. Well, I think we can. But, you know, if you're in a meeting and you say the wrong thing, somebody's going to give you the heave-ho or something. Or that's what it seems like, listening to my children talk about being in meetings. And it's, you know, it's even harder, I think, for them than it was when they were in offices. And they could go to the, whatever they do, water cooler, you know, they had a break, they had a time. They don't seem to have many breaks, although then my son told me, oh, people are walking around the park with their phone doing their meetings, which seemed weird, but there you are. The world has changed, hasn't it?
I kept thinking of the word co-op, actually, the cooperative, because that is actually an entity. Yeah. It's a legal entity, but and I was, because I've been part of co-ops, and sometimes it has been almost like which work as a collective. So there's a confusion. There's always this confusion, because in the end, someone has to run it, or someone does do a lot of the, you know, the background type work. And I think Marianne
someone has to get the funding, or someone has
done that, and you with your collective, and anyone who does an exhibition, there is always something that you need to do. That's, you know, you have to get insurance, you have to get pay for there's certain bits that you can't say, oh, we live in a fantasy world, you know, everything's free, because someone has to do the finances. That's why, you know, when it was the Women of the World with Julia and CAG, because it was a big thing, because and I don't know if CAG works as a collective either. It's all very loose, you know. So
CAG is beautifully.
It's just artists.
Chloe said she'd never been to any meetings like that ever before. The meetings.
Simon runs it, the administrator. I mean, wherever I've worked, any organization that works collectively, because we used to talk about working collectively, which meant every bit of the organization needs to communicate with each other. Because I worked in community organizations, so you had several buildings in one organization. So when we had meetings, it was very inclusive, but the administrator pulled it all together. And I think in a lot of administrators and people who do the admin are really underrated a lot of the time.
And usually they get tired of it. You know? I mean, Dom used to do masses for CAG.
Yes.
And I think at some point he thought, what about my own work?
I know, but don't you think that's kind of with you know, and I've seen this at the university and in a lot of workplaces, because there's no funding for administrators, and all of a sudden, I mean, at the university, it was all of a sudden the professors had to do all the admin work as well, you know, but beforehand you had this army of admin people doing, you know, doing all the, like, boring stuff, but they enjoyed it. You know, it was a great because, but all of a sudden it's the same. I think of artist office. I mean, when do you have time to actually do art? You have to apply for fundings and all those emails. I actually thought today, and I Googled this, but I didn't get an answer. How many emails does it take to make a blockbuster movie? I really thought, I mean, can you imagine the amount of emails?
I just had 2 scenes filmed outside of my house yesterday with Lucy Berman's thing. There were like 100 people outside my house or something. For 2 scenes. That's a lot of hours.
Getting all those people there, getting everything. It's
all with enormous egos.
It was crazy.
I think society is a bit like that when we suddenly realised during all these lockdowns and everything that the people who worked in the shops and the supermarkets and drove the buses and all those kind of things suddenly became, oh, how important are these people? And I think you said just then it was a bit, you know, the jobs that are a bit boring, but they are people's life, you know.
And they like them, you know, it's because I think you should always recognize well that not everybody wants to be a professor, for example, but somebody enjoys actually kind of maybe sorting, you know, working with a professor, and doing admin. I think it's, there's such an arrogance, isn't it, around, jobs. And also kind of I actually had to defend one of, we get lots of work piled on our team kind of at my other work. And the designer always gets it because they say, oh, it's just a little design job. Not really acknowledging and appreciating that there is no little design job, you know, it's kind of, it's work, you know, and it's really odd, isn't it?
I think it's that peculiar idea of success, you know, this thing about what is success. And an awful lot of artists have had to wait until they were dead before they were successful. So they weren't doing it thinking this is going to, they were doing it for some other reason, not that idea of being top of the pile.
I think it's usually having a sort of common philosophy, isn't it? The idea of a collective, everybody being equal. It's a sort of, it's quite a radical idea to some people, you know, that you don't have a big leader and then they boss everyone else around. You have, but everybody, and also everybody is skilled, you know, you skill people or you consent. And it reminds me of another word, consensus as well. Like there's a consensus and there's a manifesto of some sort. Or what your your sort of mission is. Like the pre-Raphaelites, they were, you know, in Ruskin, nature, Darwin, there was all those things around. One society I thought of was the Lunar Society, because I came across it recently, Josiah Wedgwood and the anti-slavery movement, because he designed the plaques that said, "Ain't I a man?" or something, and they were distributed and sold and raised money for the abolitionist movement, which connects to here, Wilberforce, the Clapham, because he was part of a group of, you know, politicians probably. I mean, the Lunar Society was scientists and artists. I think Wedgwood was the artist, so they were into futuristic ideas in the industrial era, but also because Darwin was there again, and I think he was the head of it. So it's all that really going into nature, you know, scientifically. This is the start of the Attenboroughs, isn't it? Later on, and the environment now, but you see, people either worked on the land then, and they didn't consider, oh, I'll sit and paint this landscape while they're putting hay onto the hay cart. But, you know, people who had the leisure or the money or the
elitism,
you know, to sit and paint and to be, so you have to look at class, and you have to look at, you know,
well, we're a class-ridden society.
But who had access to being able to paint, you know, I mean, or to to be able to, and in a collective, you see, when you get to the 70s, the 60s, 70s, you've got, it's poverty. You know, if you're a poor artist, if you join together, band together as a collective, you can do things collectively. And some of you will have more expertise in, say, dealing with officialdom, and some people, so it's all, right, what can we do, and how can we do it quickly as well?
And anonymity as well, Glynis. I think there's a level of anonymity with a collective, so you can maybe talk about something that's important without and still remain like a group rather than an individual.
Yeah, and also you could join with other collectives who are similar around the globe or around the country. You know, it's a way of, it's a way of propaganda as well. I suppose they're the negatives about, you know, people coming together as cliques, small cliques, and then, you know.
It's really nice. It's always really nice being reminded of those very few days we had in Berlin, Sarah, that seemed like at least a fortnight in my mind, because we just did so much. But I think it was, for me, it was the fluidity and the fact that people collected together. So like at the Tackless place, but also there was that energy of, you probably did have some people who were really driving the politics behind it, but they had no voice or no standing without everybody making work and showing it in that very chaotic, loose, powerful way. And I think it was about, for me as well, it was a time of seeing people sort of sharing a space, but also sharing expertise, so that the work that each of them that they made was bigger than they could have made on their own in some ways. And I think that was the thing about Berlin and the whole energy and this collecting together at that time. And I think it was I don't know, it made me feel like kind of there was that this energy and coming together and sharing ideas, and we were looking at music and all sorts of stuff. I mean, it was a really powerful time for us because we were students, so you are collected as a group of students as well, even though you may have really disparate practices and interests. I think it was but there seemed to be lots of little pop-up galleries, and it seemed like people had collected for maybe just for a few weeks and then would disperse, but they were tied into more than one collective. So maybe something like Tackless was an overarching collective, and then they could collaborate together on different projects because they'd got this, I don't know, and I don't know, maybe that's one thing that Lockdown Still Lives does, is that it's an overarching, it's a group from which we will all be going off and doing different things. I
think space was available.
There's an interconnection, which brings me back to that book that you told me about with Robert McFarlane. It's like mimicking the way, because we are part of nature. We tend to forget that. We think we're somehow above it, and yet we're just another part of it. And the interconnection that we have, it should be mimicked. And I constantly throughout this, I thought of the ideals of socialism and what happened. And I think that all those things like class, and they've all come into play to make it not work, because, you know, who's got more money? It's the lack of sharing. And if I go too far, I'll end up with Christianity, and then you've got to really start worrying about me. Really start worrying about me then. But it is, you know, there's always been this attempt for people to want to believe, to want to not be elitist. I remember very desperately bringing up my children thinking, I don't want them to be elitist. And then somebody would do something horrible to them at school, who I think was an absolute living nightmare child. And, you know, having been pushed by a parent and things like that, and you think, oh my God, you know, on a bad day, I just lose my ability to be optimistic. But to hear you talk about Berlin sounds wonderful.
There was definitely a feeling that there was lots of space, and you were able, and there was like, it was like somebody had taken the pressure off. So everybody would have been like, you know, under that level of pressure, and then all of a sudden it's taken off. And there's like space that you can just play. People were playing, and it all those ideas and all of those things that they hadn't been able to get access to, there was access to those things, but not just those things, but also the rest of the world. So people were coming to visit them, and they were like just so open to conversations and so open and welcoming. And so it wasn't just the fact that there was the space to do these, to have the ideas out there, and you know, it was the level of communication that was going on, because there was such excitement that people were going to visit them. So we were rocked up as a load of students who were sort of keen to kind of just explore and have adventures. So it was great. It's probably good that we weren't allowed to be there for more than 4 days, because it would probably not been great, given like
yeah, well, that's the reality. That's the reality, isn't it? I'd like to say I'd like to have been a student forever, but some days when there were people playing football in the studio, for instance, and I would suddenly become a very old and grumpy old lady and be going, excuse me, you feel like you think it will work, you want it to work, but then you get Brexit and you lose all faith in people and things.
But before we go there and lose faith again, because you were actually gaining hope just earlier, and I wanted to finish on that note, so I'm going to just reverse and kind of ignore that last one. And I think this is actually a really nice point, and it kind of, in a way, it leads to where I might want to talk about, because for me it is all about kind of the ideal and the utopian vision of artist networks, because I'm a kind of terrible idealist and dreamer and don't really live in the real world. So I really look forward to kind of continue the conversation next week. And I think Sarah Pennington, isn't it, if you would be great to still hear from you. And as well, Glynis, if you want to, I know you've touched upon some of the things, you know, I think we have a very similar kind of approach to it, you know, kind of, yeah, that, you know, that connection, equality, you know, there's still so much more to talk about in artist networks. And I think we will find another really great segue into another interesting subject, some of which actually, again, Julia has kind of touched upon. So yeah, let's take this conversation further next week and have a great week. And oh yeah, Julia, well, I hope you might be able to see us next week, but if not, have a wonderful birthday.
Might be drunk because it's my birthday.
That's all right. That's all right, Julia.
You'd all be drunk. And then whatever I were to
and that's the Wi-Fi and the Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi, how it works in the cottage.
Yeah.
Knowing our luck, it'll be, you know, the one thing.
I mean, but honestly, I think you'll have so much to do with your family, so it's perfectly understandable.
No, I won't really. I'm seeing Chloe at the weekend, but then after that, Roger and I I'm actually escaping from the whole, that I don't really want this birthday. I do, because the alternative's worse, but I don't really like it. I think I should start taking the years off, as they say, instead of putting them on. Anyway.
No, we believe whatever you tell us, Julia.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I can remember.
Well, thank you, Michelle and David.
Okay. Well,
and
thank you so much again. And
thank you, Glynis. That was really useful with your feedback. I'm gonna go and look.
Oh right, yeah, it was a bit long-winded, but you know.
Right, it's good.
Co-ops.
Yeah,
have a look at them. That's all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.